Recording in 3, 2, and 1.
This show evokes the sound of a cup hitting a saucer. Then it evokes the sound of a baguette being smothered in camembert with accordion music.
Okay, if we're not doing an episode in Steel Corners, I'm out.
We are not.
Welcome to episode 152 of Nerdery and Murdery.
Big 152. I'm Zig with your nerdery.
And I'm Jeffrey with your Murdery. Welcome to another week of the highs and lows, the good and the bad and the up and the down, the nerd and the murd. Did you see the trailer for Deadpool 3? There's
I
actually
have not.
There's two of them out, actually.
I have not.
I'm
Is it really
excited.
funny?
Yes, it looks very funny. He's going into the multiverse.
Oh, nice.
Yes, he gets pulled by the TVA and has to restore the multiverse. Wolverine is in it.
Nice.
It looks really good. There's a lot of people in it from previous Deadpools, of course, and other movies. The character who plays Blind Al, she's in Fallout. She's the overseer.
Oh yeah, she is.
Yeah, that's Blind Al. Yeah, there's some Easter eggs.
Cocaine cure for blindness.
Oh yes, they have in the trailer they have a big cocaine or heroin talk. I don't remember what it is. It's pretty funny. You'd enjoy that. You need to go see the trailer.
I think I will after we record this episode. I might just sit down and watch that.
Pretty awesome. There's some
Got a few
Easter
minutes
eggs.
in between.
There's some Easter eggs to be aware of. One of them, the villain, has a fortress that appears to be built out of a large Ant-Man costume. There's a car in there that looks suspiciously like the car Tony Stark was working on in his first movie, and it has a hood ornament that is a Iron Man head. So, I think we're in for some big treats in Deadpool 3. It comes out in July, so I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, I may have to plop down and go see that on the big screen.
Something that made me feel really old, and you're not going to know a lot of you're not going to know the names, so I'm not even going to bother with this. But the NFL draft was this weekend, and if I recall right, there are 6 players that came out in this draft that are the children of NFL Hall of Famers. Just makes me feel old. I mean, some of our listeners that'll know the names. I mean, Jerry Rice's kid is in this. Marvin Harrison's son is in. Yeah, I knew you knew Jerry Rice, but yeah, his son is in this draft. Marvin Harrison, Ed McCaffrey's kid is in it. Jeremiah Trotter's kid is in it. There's just it's really kind of wild that there are that many Hall of Famers. That their kids are in this draft just makes me feel old.
Super old.
Yes. Well, I mean, Jerry Rice played back in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
I think he played into the 90s. I'm almost positive
yeah,
of that.
He played into the 90s.
But yeah, it's just wild for me. Wild. So anyway, that's what I had on that. So I will let you take over on the nerdery side of the house. That's apparently not Steel Corners.
It is not Steel Corners.
I'm upset.
It's a British comedy.
Okay. I don't think I'm
It's
familiar
called
with this
Fresh
one.
Fields. It is also called French Fields if you saw it after a certain time. This show is charming. It's funny, but it is charming. It's a British sitcom starring Julia McKenzie and Anton Rogers. It was a rating success at the time. It was written by John Chapman and produced by Tim's Television for ITV, running for 4 series between the 7th of March 1984 and the 23rd of October 1986. The series has had reruns in recent years on drama, and currently Fresh Fields is airing on That's TV in the UK as of December of 2023. Hester and William Fields, Mackenzie and Rogers, are devoted, middle-aged, middle-class couple living in an idyllic suburban lifestyle in Barnes, London. William works as an accountant while Hester is a housewife who works part-time at a local restaurant, Lucy's Kitchen. The title's meaning and crux of the show is that Hester combats empty nest syndrome by livening up their life with new interests and hobbies, to the exasperation of the hardworking husband who just wants a quiet life. The show's opening credits feature silhouettes of the characters reflecting this. Hester rides an exercise bike and plays a drum kit while William relaxes in a rocking chair. The family home has an attached granny flat in which Hester's mother, Nancy Fanny Rowe, lives following her divorce from Hester's roguish father, Ballard Berkeley. He often tries to win her back. The pair finally remarry in the last episode. Hester and William have 2 children of their own, the never-seen Tom, who lives in New Zealand, and Emma, who is usually only heard, it's the voice of Debbie Cummings, telephoning her parents at inconvenient times. Emma's husband, Peter, Philip Bird, appears occasionally. Emma and Peter later present the Fields with their first grandchild, Guy, named after his great-grandfather. The Fields' neighbor, Sonia Barrett, played by Ann Beach, pops around in every episode to borrow items. These appearances would irritate William to comical effect. Sonia has the show's only catchphrase, "It's only Sonia," which she carols as she raps at the Fields' back door and then lets herself in. Sonia's husband, John Arthur, appears occasionally, as does William's secretary, Miss Marigold Denham, Daphne Oxenford.
Why is it that every time you try a British accent, you sound like Lister?
Because I like the Lister accent.
And I'm shocked we haven't done an episode on Red Dwarf.
I love the Liverpudlian accent. It makes me so happy. If I could do like a northern accent that's not Liverpudlian, the other northern accent, like New Order, I would do that, but I can't. It just ends up sounding like Hagrid. You're Harry Potter, then. We will eventually do a Red Dwarf episode, but they've been releasing so much stuff lately that I've just been trying to catch up.
New Red Dwarf stuff?
Oh yeah. They've been, every couple of years they'll release something else. They just did a movie like year before last year.
I'll have to look that up.
And they're probably going to do another series. Yeah, they're doing it all the. Dude, it's on. It's either Tubi, Freevee, or one of the other ones, Pluto, something like that. But yeah, you can go out and catch all of the old stuff and the new stuff.
Tubi, Fubo, Roku.
Yeah, all of that.
BritBox.
Yeah. Well, BritBox you have to pay for. I have BritBox, so I can watch stuff like Fresh Fields. Fresh Fields ended in 1986, but 3 years later, the series resumed as French Fields, which saw William and Hester relocating to France after William accepted a job there. There were 3 series of 19 episodes made between the 5th of September of 1989 and the 8th of October 1991, all written by John T. Chapman and Ian Davidson. Philip Bird appears as Peter in several episodes, with Emma finally seen on screen, now played by Sally Baxter. And Beach makes a guest appearance as Sonia in the final episode. French Fields is a sequel or a continuation of Fresh Fields. It was produced by Thames Television for ITV. Thames, for those who are reading it. Thames. ITV. Yeah. Like Fresh Fields, the theme tune to French Fields was arranged by Pick Yourself Up from the 1936 film Swing Time. The theme tune was played on an accordion and has a French feel to it. The music was by Alan Parker this time and not Harry Stoneham. The series, again, stars Anton Rogers and Julia McKenzie as middle-aged, middle-class husband and wife William and Hester Fields following the series Fresh Fields, which ran from 84 to 86. French Fields resumes the story 3 years later as William accepts a position with a French company, and the series follows Hester and William as they move from London to Calais. The pair are regularly visited by their daughter Emma, Sally Baxter, and Karen Asco, and son-in-law Peter, also played by Philip Bird. It is the only other Fresh Fields actor to appear regularly, as Emma only appeared via voiceover by Debbie Cummings in the original show. Other regular cast members include the French estate agent Chantal Mauriac, played by Pamela Salem, who is also the Fields' neighbor to the left, and snobbish English couple Hugh Robin Kermode, and Jill, Liz Crowther, Trendle, their neighbors to the right. Hester and Williams also cope with Madame Remelot, Valerie Rush, the unintelligible, ancient, and generally useless French cleaner who lives on and cares for the estate. Les Hirondelles, or swallows in English, where they all live. Also popping in regularly are local farmer and mayor Michoud Dax, Oliver Pierre in Series 1 and 2, and Philip McGough in Series 3, and his cheeky daughter Marie Christine, played by Victoria Baker, to whom Hester does her best to teach English. Nicholas Courtney also appears frequently as the estate's owner, the Marquis. Anne Beach, Sonia from Freshfields, makes a guest appearance in the final episode in which Hester and William decide to return to their former UK home. So in Freshfields, it picks up, just like a couple of years later. He gets a job in Calais, because it's the beginning of the EU and everything, before Brexit, because this is the early 90s. And they move from London down to Calais, which is, used to be an ordeal. Now you can do it in 45 minutes because it's right across the water. It is lovely and charming. I think it was actually filmed in England. No, because there's some shots of the port to Calais. So I think they may have actually filmed it in Calais. Or at least the outside shots. I think, the sets are still the sets. This show is utterly charming. It ran on KERA, our local PBS station, which I am going to do an episode on. I'm going to do an exclusive on KERA coming up here in the next couple of months. But it played for quite a while. Do you remember this one at all?
No, not at all.
Yeah, it played mostly in the 90s. After it had done its complete run, because it ran from 84 to 91 with a 2 or 3 year break in the middle. It's utterly charming. And the Hester ends up being an English teacher when they're in France, so she actually gets something to do, which was kind of the crux of the original show. And again, they end up retiring and moving back to England at the end of it. But it's great to see Nicholas Courtney in there playing a Frenchman. He still sounds English to me. But yeah, this show it's infinitely charming. Julia McKenzie and Anton Rogers are great together. Of course, they're both English character actors that are all over British sitcoms, and you'll see them. I think they both have done Doctor Who several times and things of that nature. Julia McKenzie is most known for playing Miss Marple, which was real big. She started doing that after Freshfields. But no, this is one of those shows that I talk about it and everybody's like, I don't remember that one. I was like, dude, this show was so charming. It's evocative of another show made roughly the same time about this lady or this couple, where the husband has been the sole provider, but he discovers that his wife has been writing a book, and it turns out to be a bestseller, and she becomes a bestseller. I can't even remember the name of the series, but it's this same show in reverse, because the husband, she's like, look, we're rich, you can retire, and he's like, what do I do? It's charming. But this is the same sort of thing. Julia McKenzie is she's just this little ball of energy, and poor Anton Rogers, he just wants to relax. He's done raising his kids. He's ready to hang out with this old lady, and she wants to go do stuff. And a lot of the French stuff is great. You get to hear a lot of French in the second series. as well as she's teaching English to these French children, and they're teaching her French, and it's again charming. It's charming as all get out. I love it. Plus, you get to see shots of Barnes, um, which is it's in London, but it looks like it's not. If that makes sense, it's like a wooded area off to the side. It's again beautiful. Same with Calais. You know, you think France has this gigantic population. A third of them live in and around Paris. They have other cities besides Paris, so most of that country is farms, um, as far as the eye can see, and it's just charming, charming, beautiful fields, and it's a nice show. It's nice. It's pleasant. That's what it is. It's pleasant. It's pleasant to watch and fun. I would say get out there and check it out. I have recorded, or in, I have included. I don't know why I couldn't say included. Included several episodes in our YouTube playlist, so you guys can see it again and just see how charming these two people are, especially Julia McKenzie and Anton Rogers playing off of each other. Brilliant, brilliant, and they actually look like people who've been together for 20, 30 years, even though they're not. But yeah, that's about it for Fresh Fields / French Fields.
Cool. Thank you for that. I hope everybody goes and checks that out. Like I said, I've never seen it. I'm not even familiar with this. I looked up the actors, and I think I only knew a couple of them in there. So I do love British comedies, and I know Zig does. So you definitely go out and give those a watch. Speaking of though, things on our YouTube playlist, it actually takes me back to Facebook. I've seen some of our videos get tagged by Facebook as having possible copyright stuff in it, so they've edited out the video.
Yes, yes. But they play on every other platform, so yeah. Every once in a while, they'll be like, "Oh, copyright infringement." It's like, okay.
Yeah, so funny, awesome. Appreciate that. With that, we'll step over to the murdery side of the house.
Murder.
For today, I got my information off Manchester Evening News, Sky News, Medium, the New York Times, and Daily Mail. And this is the Moors murders.
You're talking about the Moors murders?
I am, and it was so wild as I was going through this. I'd see pictures and different stuff. I'm like, have I covered this before? Because some of it looks so familiar. And I mean, I actually had to go back and look through our list, and I'm like, no, 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 I don't.
I talked about them because Peter Hook and Stephen Morris got picked up and questioned by the police of New Order and Joy Division, got picked up and questioned by the police for like a full day because their tour schedule happened to coincide with 2 or 3 of the murders, and they could put them into place in a van.
You didn't cover this.
No, I didn't cover it, but I didn't talk about it.
You just spoke about it. Okay. So maybe that's wrong.
Oh, and Morrissey wrote a song about it. Stuff for little children.
Maybe that's why I'm so familiar with this. It's wild. It's very wild. It's very extremely tragic and horrifying. It started off with a quote. I saw senior detectives and legendary crime reporters, hard men who had been through the war and seen terrible things, dissolve into tears. This was how one former police officer described the experiences of having to listen to a 16-minute long tape recording of the harrowing cries and pleas of 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey. She was the youngest victim of crimes that were eventually condemned to infamy as the Moors murders. The tape had been played at Chester Aziz Court on Tuesday, April 26, 1966. 6 months earlier, the hideous artifact had been found stowed away in one of 2 suitcases in a left luggage office alongside books of Nazism, violence, sadistic erotica, and distressingly, 9 pornographic photos of the little girl. In the days preceding the discovery, her naked body had been carefully unearthed by police officers from a shallow grave on the moors. During that time, a couple in their 20s from a Hyde Council estate were being investigated in connection with the violent death of 17-year-old boy named Edward Evans. Police had been considering their potential involvement in other child murders across neighboring towns and cities that in the present day form the greater Manchester area. A discovery of this evidence greatly strengthened the case against them, and by the time the preliminary hearings began before their eventual trial, the world's press had converged on Hyde. Soon the names Ian Brady and Myra Hindley were synonymous with, quote, pure evil. The mere mention of their most infamous moniker, the Moors Murders, which was bestowed upon them by the British press, conjures up images of their now notorious mugshots as they glaze down the barrel of a camera lens in very stark monochrome. Even in the months, years, and eventually decades after they'd been in prison for their murder, Brady on 3 counts and Hindley on 2, plus an additional accessory charge, interest in the case never subsided. Every tabloid newspaper in Great Britain would have their eyes and ears peeled for an opportunity for a headline. Brady and Hindley were duly assigned plenty of other monikers too: the Devil's Disciples, the most evil couple in Britain, the Monsters of the Moors, Satan's Children, and countless more. And this is just a tip of the iceberg when it comes to the case's enduring media sensationalism. So these are the most basic facts as of 2024, which was 61 years after their first murder and 59 after their last. Ian Brady and Myra Hindley were responsible for the abductions and murders of 5 children around Manchester, England in the 1960s. At least 4 of the children were sexually assaulted, and at least 3 had been buried in shallow graves on Saddleworth Moor, which is a vast stretch of moorland in the Dark Peak. Since Ian
Do you know what
Brady,
moors are?
yeah, oh yeah,
Do you? Okay.
yeah, I know what moors are. If you want to explain it, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. So for our audience, they used to be forests 10,000 years ago. They clear cut the forests so they could plant and grow and raise sheep. But there are these rock channels that are about 2 or 3 feet deep throughout the whole place that still have the old forest floor stuff in them. That's usually the shallow graves. Usually they just put them in these channels and then cover them over.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't see the channels. That's why they're so treacherous, because there's grassland growing all around them. So very, very dangerous. And occasionally you'll run into a bog, which you might not be able to get out of if you're out there alone in the dark. Moors
Oh,
can
wow.
be very dangerous. It's also where young people go out in corrals because there's nothing out there because they're sheep grazing fields.
Mm-hmm. Ian Brady was considered an unreliable narrator, so his own detailed recollections of his youth should be regarded with some skepticism. And there is little concrete evidence surrounding the true circumstances of his upbringing. What is known is that he was born in Glasgow on January 2nd, 1938, to a single mother who soon found herself unable to provide for him. He was taken in by a foster family at around 4 months old, and but though by all accounts they provided him with the care and love that he needed, his relationship with his birth mother was somewhat strained. After Brady and Hindley's eventual trial, one reporter remarked that Brady probably drew something sinister in the chromosomal lottery. Some modern commentators had theorized that the less than ideal circumstances surrounding the first few months of Brady's life may have had a traumatic effect upon his brain, specifically the part that regulates bonding and emotional stability, sexual desire, the ability to identify with the emotions of others, and the integration of emotion with perception. Brady did admit to animal cruelty as a child, although he'd later retract this, and he grew up shy with few friends.
I wouldn't be surprised if there was some animal cruelty going on.
I'm almost positive there was. There's other people that said it down the road. Supposedly, his documented fascination with the Nazis, horror fiction, and true crime tales about gangsters began at an early age. He claimed to have harbored resentment upon learning he was the illegitimate at the age of 13, and his teenage years were marked with juvenile delinquency, with multiple charges of housebreaking, theft, and attempted theft to his name. After breaking his probation at 16 years old, he was ordered by the courts to move in with his birth mother, who was now living in Manchester with her new husband. At the age of 17, he was sentenced to 2 years in borstal training, which is an old-fashioned form of juvenile detention after he had been found guilty of accessory to robbery. After his release from Borstal, he worked a few menial jobs before eventually finding employment as a stock clerk for a chemical distribution firm called Millward's Merchandise when he was 21. Um, on paper, he seemed to have turned his life around, but his fascination with violence and crime was still growing, and he became increasingly disturbed by sadistic fantasies. In January of 61, 18-year-old Myra Henley started working at the firm as a typist, and though he didn't initially pay much attention to her, their mutual passion for poetry and literature would alter everything by the year's end, and this would pave the way for her very slow and steady entry into his world. On July 23rd, 1942, Myra Henley was born to Nellie and Bob Henley in Manchester. Nellie worked as a machinist, and Bob was a paratrooper who did not return to Myra's life until after the war ended in 1945. Their home in Gorton, Manchester became a poisonous atmosphere after Nellie gave birth to her second daughter, Maureen, in 1946. And this was largely due to Bob's alcohol addiction and his aggressive temperament, which was either instigated or aggravated following his return from the war. Myra's grandmother, Ellen Mayberry, who lived nearby, agreed to take her in so her parents could focus on raising Maureen, and Myra would go on to live with Ellen until the day of her eventual arrest. Myra did still see her parents daily and ate every meal with her family, but she had a difficult relationship with her father, who exposed her to violence at a very early age, though by her watching him beat her mother. She also later alleged that both her mother and her father beat her, but she repeatedly contradicted details in her reiterations and so also can be considered an unreliable narrator. Bob also encouraged Myra and Maureen to defend themselves from bullies with violence. At school, Myra was talented at physical education and English, but had a tendency to play truant and discovered that she could very easily manipulate her grandmother into writing sick notes for her. Henley had a small but close circle of friends, one of whom was a boy named Michael Higgins. And when Henley was 14, Michael accidentally drowned in a reservoir and she fell into a deep state of grief, blaming herself for not going along with him that day as she felt she could have saved him somehow. Some of those close to her speculated that she was hysterical, and much later on in her life, a psychiatrist noted that though she was not mentally ill in any way, she exhibited emotional lability, which is a tendency to shift rapidly and dramatically between different emotional states. Henley committed herself to the Catholic Church soon after Michael's death, and when she eventually got into a relationship at 16 years old, she held her virginity sacred. Her boyfriend proposed to her on her 17th birthday, and although she initially accepted, she called off the engagement after a few months as she felt she was bored with him and dissatisfied with the idea of settling down. Her friends suspected that even though they were of the same age, that she thought he was too young for her. Henley did have several occupations before she ended up at Millward's, and not everyone had a good impression of her. At one workplace, she claimed to have lost her paycheck one day, and out of pity, her colleagues chipped in to help her make up for it. But her coworkers began to suspect she was trying to trick them out of money when not long after she asserted that the identical incident had occurred once more. Despite her modest upbringing, she seemed to look down on people, and when she began dating Ian Brady, these characteristics became even more apparent, leading some to accuse her of being spoiled and a bit snobbish. The memories of Myra during this time weren't all bad, but her most lauded positive trait was that she was a good babysitter who had an exceptional way with children, which interestingly, in the context of the crime she'd later be committed of, seems very unfathomable and yet highly disturbing, since she would
Mhm.
eventually admit to abusing this quality to gain her victim's trust. Myra claimed to have fallen in love with Ian on day one of meeting him in the office. She started writing in a diary halfway through the year, which detailed that she had tried to pursue him for months before they eventually got together, even during the times when he was outright dismissive of her in the office. They first got together at the Christmas party of 1960, the office Christmas party in 1961, and remained on casual terms for months before beginning a romantic relationship that soon became sexual. Henley believed that Brady, despite his denials, was sexually inexperienced like himself, and remembered that their first efforts at intercourse were very awkward and disjointed. They then started to experiment by incorporating sadomasochistic pornography into sexual fantasies, which were strictly between themselves for the time being. Ian Brady fancied himself an autocrat, and he was very fond of the philosophical ideas of the Marquis de Sade. As far as he was concerned, people should be free to act on their base desires if they so desired, regardless of the consequences. And it seemed that Ian would eventually come to interpret Sade's work as a justification for his own pedophilia and his burgeoning desire to commit sexual assault and murder. This would eventually cross over into his and Myra's sex life, and they felt compelled by the idea of committing crimes. They initially discussed the prospect of robbery, and even though it was most definitely in a fantastical sense, he suggested that she acquire a shotgun and some rifles, which was something he couldn't do because of his juvenile record.
Mm-hmm.
They took a lot of photos of themselves practicing with the guns around the Peak District as if they were the British equivalent of Bonnie and Clyde. Myra also received shooting instruction from a co-worker who served as president of the nearby rifle club, but he would subsequently attest that she feared a kick whenever she discharged a weapon and would shoot with both eyes closed. During this time, she was also taking driving lessons at Ian's urging because he couldn't do this himself. And though they both enjoyed the freedoms this afforded them, it was largely in preparation for the abduction of their young victims. So Saddleworth Moor was Ian and Myra's favorite spot to talk about their innermost desires. The regeneration of the landscape had since taken place. At the time, the landscape was scarce, brown in color, and foreboding, with its barbaric appearance attracting them, as you had mentioned. By June of '63, the couple were living together at Henley's grandmother's home. They frequently annoyed their neighbors by playing loud music, such as Rival's Bolero, on purpose. At work, they were regarded as surly and unsociable by their colleagues, and they would often giggle over pornographic books at their desks. And Myra, in particular, would often be heard making explicitly racist and/or xenophobic remarks about various minorities. One time, she mortified her coworkers when she walked into the office with an open book containing a picture of Holocaust victims in a mass grave, laughing and declaring, "Just look at this lot." Ian and Myra's respective accounts of their private life differ substantially. Myra claimed that Ian regularly abused and raped her, and one friend had told police that early on in their relationship, Myra had written her a letter claiming she feared for her safety after suspecting that Ian had drugged and sexually violated her one evening. Myra later retrieved the letter and destroyed it for reasons unknown, and Ian denied that was ever abusive towards her. As the years went by after their 1966 trial, several journalists expressed the belief that Ian had corrupted Myra by exposing her to literature that promoted violence. Um, Ian and Myra would both deny this over time.
I've heard some stories that it was the other way around too.
Yeah.
But I think it was Myra that did it to Ian.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Ian claimed that though he felt himself an influence upon Myra, abandoning her Christian principles and faith, he had, quote, never seriously set out to corrupt anyone. Myra, on the other hand, wrote in a 1978 parole plea that she had confused love for infatuation when it came to Ian, and that she felt totally under his domination and worshipped him blindly. She said, quote, "I believed him because I thought I loved him, and his arguments were so convincing, he demolished my tiny precepts with a single word." She didn't admit her guilt over her involvement in the eventual crimes until 1987. And in the years following this admission, she admitted to a therapist that, quote, "I have to own the part that I played in things to accept that I wanted some of the things to happen." Despite police and victims' families suspecting differently, she would continue to insist her role in the murders was subordinate to Ian's, and that she had never physically or sexually harmed a child. So on July 12th, 1963, 16-year-old Pauline Reed was walking to a dance in nearby Openshaw when she was approached by a woman in a black Ford Prefect, Ford Prefect, van on Froxmore Street, Gorton. Pauline was friends with Maureen Henley, so she immediately recognized Maureen's older sister as the driver of the van, though Myra Henley claimed that she did not intentionally target Pauline and that she just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Myra asked Pauline if she would help her look for a lost glove on Saddleworth Moor, about a 30-minute drive from Gorton. Pauline accepted, and they were trailed by Ian on his motorbike in the long drive to the moor. Ian and Myra each gave different accounts of her murder, as they did with the other four murders, but what is certain is that Pauline was hit in the face and raped before having her throat cut twice. Her body was buried in a shallow grave about 150 yards from the road. 12-year-old John Kilbride was Ian and Myra's next victim on Saturday the 23rd of November, 1963. He was abducted from Ashton Market, Ashton-under-Lyne, under the same pretenses as Pauline Reed had been, and that they were looking for a lost glove. It was a cold, dark, and foggy evening, and once they reached the moor and walked outside of the road, John was ambushed, sexually assaulted, and then killed. The cause of his death was never reliably ascertained, or ascertained, but Myra asserted that Ian informed her that he had strangled him using a ligature, while Ian asserted that he had strangled him manually. His body was buried in a shallow grave with a stream running through it. So when his remains were eventually discovered 2 years later, they were so badly decomposed that his mother was forced to identify her son solely by his clothing. On Tuesday, June 16th, 1964, 12-year-old Keith Bennett was walking to his grandmother's house in Longsight, Manchester, when he was approached by Myra while in a white Morris minivan, which she had recently purchased. Myra claimed that Ian was in the back of the van, but Ian denied this and said Myra picked him up a short while later before heading to the moor. And what happened next is uncertain, but Ian claimed that, like their other two previous victims, Myra claimed that with their other two previous victims, that she was not with Ian at the time of the sexual assault or the murder. This time, she said she waited on a plateau with binoculars and she saw Keith disappear with Ian into a gully, like a lamb to the slaughter. She claimed to have neither heard nor seen anything, despite the fact that sound carried easily across the empty moors. Ian allegedly returned sometime later carrying only a spade, and the couple's accounts of how Keith died were the same as their accounts of how John Kilbride had died. Tragically, despite repeated and widespread searches across the Saddleworth Moor area, Keith's body was never been found and is presumed lost. In September of 1964, Ian, Myra, and Myra's grandmother were relocated from their Gorton council house to the new Hattersley Overspill development in Hyde, Cheshire. By that time, Myra's sister Maureen, who was now 18, had married her boyfriend, the 16-year-old David Smith, and welcomed a daughter named Angela Dawn into the world. David himself was a former juvenile delinquent with a difficult upbringing and home life, and he had extensive court history of housebreaking, theft, and violence, much to the dismay of Myra and the rest of Maureen's family. All accounts, though, despite his and Maureen's relationship being tumultuous, he was a natural and caring father to Angela. During this time, Ian bonded with David, as Myra and Maureen also started to spend more time together, though neither Myra nor Ian particularly cared about the new baby. This annoyed David and Maureen, but they saw nothing sinister about it at the time and ultimately attributed this to Ian being an eccentric introvert and Myra being concerned about how her younger sister might have been coping with motherhood at such a young age. On Saturday, December 26th, 1964, which is Boxing Day in the UK,
Boxing
10-year-old,
Day.
yep, 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey was abducted from a fairground in Miles Platting, Manchester. She was not brought directly to the moor this time, but instead brought to Ian and Myra's new house, where her torture was captured on audio tape in the spare bedroom. Specifically, Ian and Myra were heard trying to force a gag into Leslie's mouth and undress her, and the tape, as previously mentioned, ran on for 16 minutes as the little girl frantically begged for her mother. The recording apparently ended so that Ian could plug in his photography light, and he took multiple pornographic photos of the child. Myra claimed that that after the tape had ended, she went into the bathroom to run a bath for Leslie, and when she came back in, Leslie was lying deceased on the bed with an injury to her neck and other injuries that indicated she had been raped. Years later, Ian contested this version of events and claimed that Myra strangled Leslie with a silk cord, though Leslie's autopsy had already proven this story to be false. Strangulation by ligature was excluded, and there was no clear injury to Leslie's neck either. And like John Kilbride, her cause of death remains unknown to this day. On April 25th, 1965, David Smith, now 17 years old, went to work as Maureen stayed home to look after the 6-month-old Angela Dawn. At one point in the day, she went upstairs to check on her sleeping baby and found that Angela wasn't breathing. Maureen wasted no time in rushing Angela to the hospital, but sadly, no amount of care or attention could save her. Her untimely death was eventually determined to have been caused by bronchitis. David, in particular, was plunged into a deep state of grief, and he and Maureen sought the consolation in Myra and Ian. The group often went to Saddleworth Moor together, where David and Maureen unknowingly sat on top of graves of other deceased children, presumably to the amusement of Ian and Myra. David then became increasingly skeptical about the existence of God, and Ian took this new opportunity in stride. He started to encourage David to read the same pornographic literature he had already introduced to Myra. Um, it does need to be noted that Ian was a whole decade older than his new friend, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And looking back years later, David would come to see that he was a victim of attempted grooming by Ian, although that word meant nothing to him at the time, and this was
Yeah.
really an alien concept in the 60s.
Yeah. 60? Well, they got caught in 66. So.
Right. The two of them would often drink in the living room while Myra spent time with Maureen, and Ian used this as an opportunity to discuss the prospects of robbery and murder with David. He naively went along with this as he didn't trust Ian was in any way serious about it. As the prosecution's lead witness in the trial that took place months later, David told the court that one evening around September of 1965, they had been drinking for 4 or 5 hours when Brady asked what he would do if he had to shoot somebody during a robbery, and he would consider using marked bullets. David said, quote, "I thought it was the drink talking, and I looked at him and waited for him to carry on. He went on to say he asked me if I was capable of using a gun or murder." When he was then asked by one of the prosecutors to explain what his reaction was to that, David responded, quote, "He was the listening party. He held the stage. He was doing the talking. He went on to say that he had killed 3 or 4 people. This just convinced me that it was the beer talking. He leaned back and said, 'You really don't believe me.' I must have smiled at him, getting a bit tired I was, and then he said, 'It will be done,' and a matter of a quarter of an hour later, we were both asleep." On a different occasion, Ian had told David that his victims were buried on the moors and that he had photographic evidence of his crimes. David didn't believe him and again thought it was the alcohol talking. Ian also discussed with him how he had prepared for each murder, with David explaining to the court that, quote, all his clothes would be brushed and cleaned and inspected, everything would be listed that he had on, and he said he took a drug, Pro Plus, as a stimulant. David was convinced that Ian was leading up to committing robbery and later admitted that on the 5th of October, he gave the books and pornography he had been reading back to Ian in order to clear his home of any incriminating material. Ian and Myra put them in suitcases, and David watched as they then drove off in Myra's car. And it was later revealed, as I'd mentioned way earlier, that he had deposited them in the left luggage office at Manchester Central Railway Station. Myra woke David and Maureen up the following evening by pressing the doorbell to their flat. When she came upstairs, she and Maureen had a brief conversation before Myra had asked David if she could walk her back home. David agreed, and when they reached the house, Ian called in David to ask him if he wanted to collect some miniature alcohol bottles from the kitchen. He then left David in there, and seconds later, David heard a couple of ear-piercing screams. He ran into the living room to see Ian hitting a young man around the neck and head and neck with a hatchet. This young man in question was 17-year-old Edward Evans from Ardwick, Manchester. He was approached at Manchester Central Railway Station by Ian and asked if he would like to come back to his house for drinks, and claimed to have introduced Myra as his sister when he reached the car. Ian claimed that Edward was a familiar face to him from Manchester's gay scene, but it's unknown as to whether this was the truth or whether Ian was deliberately alleging that Edward was a homosexual in order to paint his victim in a damaging light and deflect some of the accountability from himself onto Edward. As a result of the careless repetition of Brady's claims in the press, Edward's family endured enormous suffering in the 60s in Britain when homosexuality was still regarded as a crime and a perversion. Furthermore, forensics and the police were unable to ascertain if Ian or Myra had engaged him in any form of sexual activities with Edward the night before David Smith showed there, whether it had been consenting or not. One lesser reported detail of this murder is that an affectionate letter from a female friend of Edward's was found by police on his deceased body, though her identity and the nature of relationship with Edward was unknown, and this letter was stained in blood. Of attacking Edward with the hatchet, Ian would later maintain that it should have only taken one hit to kill him, meaning that the intent was for David to run into the room, see the bloodied corpse on the floor, and then immediately react to it. Instead, it took 14 hits, and David ended up watching the gruesome murder in its entirety as he stood in shock in the doorway. Edward was still not deceased after this, so Ian proceeded to strangle him with an electrical cord in order to accelerate his death, and likely to minimize the risk of either a neighbor hearing or Myra's grandmother, who was upstairs asleep in bed. Inevitably, she did wake up to the noise, but Myra reassured her that Ian had just dropped the tape recorder on his foot, and so she went back to sleep. Throughout the murder, Myra stood watching Brady attack Edward, even though she later claimed that she was in the kitchen with her hands over her ears during the ordeal. This was not only contested by David Smith and later Ian in the years after he had confessed in 1985, but forensics evidence also confirmed this due to the arterial blood spurts on the outside of her shoes, meaning that not only was she in the room, but she stood close to Edward.
Okay, I want to get this from David's perspective. He's been talking all this bullshit, right? You come around the corner, hear a yell, you walk in, and you see this.
Yeah, I know.
Wow. Oh man, sorry. Please continue.
No, it's fine.
I wanted to paint that picture.
Well, no, David had to force himself to think straight in the aftermath.
Yeah.
He said he feared that if he didn't comply, that Ian and Myra would kill him next.
Yeah. Oh, I'll bet.
He did assist them with cleaning up the house, tying up Edward's body, and moving it into the spare room so they could bury him on the moor with the other 4 children the next day.
Mm-hmm.
After about 3 hours, the house was clear of any visible trace of the murder, and David returned home to his flat. He claimed that he was shaken and sickened by what he had unwillingly witnessed and taken part in. He did tell the traumatic events that of the evening to Maureen, and then the two of them decided to wait a few hours before reporting to police in case they were ambushed by Ian and Myra on their way to the phone box. Their terrified call was eventually logged at 6:07 a.m. on the morning of Thursday, October 7th, 1965.
Way to go, David. Just way to go. Wait till you're clear. Go talk to the police. Good man.
Well, Ian was arrested in his home by police 2 hours later. Myra would have 4 more days left of freedom before police had enough evidence to charge her. By the time of the trial in April of 1966, 3 bodies had been recovered. This was Edward Evans, Leslie Ann Downey, and John Kilbride. Ian had initially admitted to hitting Edward with the hatchet, but claimed he did it in self-defense during a confrontation, and that David Smith was the one to strangle him afterwards. He absolved Myra of all accountability. Both denied all knowledge of the murder of John Kilbride, despite Ian having taken a photograph of Myra and her dog Puppet standing directly above the shallow grave and looking down. Regarding the murder of Leslie Ann Downey, they claimed that Ian had agreed to photograph the child for David Smith, but had assumed that he was bringing them a girl much older than 10 years old, and that their behavior, as heard on the tape, was merely them trying to placate her. They claimed that afterwards David removed her from their home, with Ian explaining that after completion, we all got dressed and went downstairs. Little did he know that his blunderous choice of phrasing would hint at both his and Henley's involvement in sexually assaulting Leslie. On May 6, 1966, Ian was found guilty of the murders of Edward Evans, Leslie Ann Downey, and John Kilbride, and handed 3 life sentences. Myra was handed 2 life sentences. Sorry. After being convicted of the murders of Edward and Leslie, plus an additional 7 years for harboring, assisting, and maintaining that Ian knowing that he had killed John Kilbride. The trial judge, Justice Fenton Atkinson, described the couple in his closing remarks as 2 sadistic killers of the utmost depravity, and made a point that he was passing only sentences that the law now allowed, referencing the fact that the death penalty had been outlawed only months before the trial. The British public were outraged not only by the unspeakable sadism of Ian and Myra's crimes, but also the fact that they did not receive the death penalty. However, at this time, the families of Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett were still left without answers as to what would happen to their missing relatives. Pauline's mother, Joan Reed, recalled, quote, "I never thought that Myra Henley and Ian Brady was to do with it all until their arrest, because her sister was a near neighbor, lived next door, but one, Maureen. She went visiting there. Myra Henley was talking to me normally and saying she was sorry about Pauline, knowing she had done that. I didn't think till after it all came back to me what was what." Myra notably spent the rest of her life campaigning for parole. After 6.5 years of corresponding behind bars, she broke up with Ian in 1972 and rediscovered her Catholicism. She maintained she knew nothing of the murders, but directly implicated Ian in them, which left him feeling betrayed by her. Ian publicly admitted his involvement in the killings for the first time in 1985 to the journalist Fred Harrison. This was an effort to keep Myra behind bars for good, but when police reopened their investigation of the case after the resulting Sunday People articles, Brady was, quote, "scornful of any suggestion that he had confessed to more murders and clearly mentally unwell." He was diagnosed with acute paranoia and schizophrenia later that year and was transferred to a psychiatric hospital. Despite this, the police decided to continue searching Saddleworth Moor. On Thursday, October 31st, 1986, Winnie Johnson, who was the mother of Keith Bennett, wrote a letter to Myra in a direct appeal for her to tell her where her son is buried and what happened to him. She wrote, quote, "As a woman, I'm sure you can envisage the nightmare I have lived with day and night, 24 hours a day since then. Not knowing whether my son is alive or dead, whether he ran away or was taken away, is literally a living hell, something which you no doubt have experienced during your many, many years locked in prison. Please, I beg of you, please tell me what happened to Keith. My heart tells me you know, and I am on bended knees begging you to end this torture and finally put my mind at rest." According to a staff member at Cookham Wood Hospital, Myra appeared genuinely moved by the letter, but then firmly declared, "I wish I did know something. I could at least then put the poor woman out of her misery." Police visited Myra, and although she refused to admit any involvement in the killings, she agreed to help by looking at photographs and maps to try to identify the spots that she had visited with Ian. After weeks of cooperation with police, including a visit to Saddleworth Moor and an unsuccessful attempt to trigger her memories, Myra made a formal confession to her involvement with the murders in February of 1987. She admitted to abducting the children and to harboring Ian in the knowledge that he had sexually assaulted and murdered them. And although she was positively reinforced by police and her own counsel, Detective Chief Superintendent Peter Topping and his team ultimately felt that they had witnessed, quote, "a great performance rather than a genuine confession." Based on Myra's account of the murder of Pauline Reed, police were able to narrow down their search focus on Moore, and her body was finally recovered on Wednesday, the 1st of July, 1987. 2 days later, police took Ian to visit the Moor in hopes that he had it. Whoa, I lost my notes suddenly. I'm so sorry.
Yep.
Where'd they go?
Happens.
Here we go.
It happens.
So 2 days later, the police took Ian to the morgue in the hopes that he had any information that would result in the discovery of Keith Bennett's body. But this was unsuccessful as Ian appeared confused and disillusioned on the day. The search would eventually be called off in August after police felt they had exhausted every possible lead. Myra would die in prison in 2002, and Brady died in a high security hospital in 2017, both of natural causes due to prolonged health complications. The BBC reported on Wednesday, July 1st, 2009, that Greater Manchester Police had officially given up the search on Keith Bennett, saying that, quote, only a major scientific breakthrough or fresh evidence would see the hunt for his body restart. At around 11:25 a.m. on Thursday, September 29, 2022, Greater Manchester Police was contacted by a representative of an author who had been researching the Moors Murders case, claiming that suspected human remains had been found on the Saddleworth Moor. This would end up proving to be a false alarm, and since it has been alleged by Alan Bennett, who was Keith Bennett's brother, that nothing more on this was an attempted promotional stunt to assign some credibility to the author in question. The suspected human remains were actually confirmed to be plant material. And that's the vicious story of the Moors murders.
Well, thank you for that, sir. I actually knew a little bit about this.
Yeah. And like I said, I must have too, because I saw the pictures and the more I was going through it, I literally had to go back to our site multiple times. Like, did I miss this? Did I cover
Did we
this
do
somewhere?
this? Did we do
Because
this?
it
No,
was
no, we've
all so
talked
familiar.
about it, but we haven't
So
talked about it.
yeah, and I must have read some on it too, because this did seem very familiar to me. The pictures that'll be up on the website are very famous of their mugshot photos, extremely famous, because this was a very
Dig a
high
shallow
profile crime.
grave and I'll lay me down. Sorry, I have the whole time you've been doing this. I've had the "Suffer Little Children" song by the Smiths rolling through my head.
No worries. So thanks for that. That'll take us to the end of another recording week. As always, you can find more on our website, nerderymurdery.com. That's our hub for everything we talk about. It has links to this episode, pictures from what we talked about, and you can also find the link to our YouTube page, which Zig so often updates.
That's right. You should have plenty of episodes of Fresh Fields and French Fields to peruse and enjoy.
You can also find the link to our merchandise, where if you wish to show off your Nerdery Murdery fandom, please do consider purchasing something for that. That, along with our our patrons, you can find our link to our Patreon on our page as well. But our merchandise and our patrons do help with the cost of the show. It costs keeping us on the air, produce it, and keep everything going. So please do consider one of those two avenues to help us out. We appreciate each and every one of you.
Please and thank you.
Please and thank you. And last but not least, please don't forget to leave a 5-star review wherever you can. It really helps us and helps others find our content that may be looking for the information that we talk about. So with that,
I have been Zig with your nerdery.
and I'm Jeffrey with your murdery.
Cue the music.